Hi, welcome to the video. So today I'm going to kind of give you an outline or syllabus of things to practice on guitar to kind of give people a direction and keep them from not knowing what to do next. Basically, this is where I'm working off of. I've got the column of single note ideas, chords, miscellaneous, optional, and some stuff that applies to chords and single notes. You can download that as reference if you want on my Patreon page. Link is in the description. You don't have to be a member. It's free to everyone. Though if you want to become a member, of course, and donate, I would appreciate that. So I'm going to go through these things fairly quickly because I don't want this to drag out to an hour-long video. Most of the things on this list, though, I've got at least one video already covering, each one specifically. In some of the areas like arpeggios, I've got probably about 30 videos out on playing them. So you can check my channel for a lot more details on any of these you want to specifically work on. Okay, so basically when you're working through these, of course this isn't every possibility that you can practice. And many of these areas have many different levels you can practice too. So I might list something like I said, like scales or something, major and minor scales. There's so many different fingerings you can do, so many different ways to practice them. In fact, I've got a video that is almost an hour long that's 22 levels of scale practice. So yeah, you can, each one of these can cover anywhere from a few days of practice to years of practice. So I'm going to start off with single note playing, and basically these two columns, the chords and single note playing, they can be done at the same time. You don't have to do one and then practice the other one. You can be practicing like a basic one for chords and a basic one for scales at the same time. So the first thing on scale practice is basically having good technique. So a simple thing to do is take just like a 4-note pattern, for example, and work through that at slow speed, both ascending and descending back. The idea of that is develop position on your fingers, so you're always laying your fingers close to the metal fret, but not on it, so you get the closer you are, the less pressure you have to apply. If you get on it, it'll start buzzing. I also want, if you're a beginner, get used to using all 4 fingers and develop coordination and strength in all the fingers. You have to have good hand position for this. If you have your thumb here and you're trying to stretch, you physically can't do it. So you have to lower your thumb for that. It's okay to bring your thumb up if you don't need to stretch your bar. Okay, so first thing is just develop some basic coordination and strength in your fingers. For chords, first thing to do, and I'm already assuming some things. I'm assuming you already can tune guitar at this point. With a tuner, you already can read chord boxes and tablature. So, some things like that aren't on the list. Okay, and also some of these miscellaneous ones I wrote, they can be done anytime. So the first thing I wrote on that, before we jump into chords, is be playing, learning, composing songs, licks, chord progressions. So right from the beginning, you should be playing songs, even if it's just a single riff or lick from something that's very simple. You shouldn't be doing just practicing scales and chords. Songs are important. Should be practiced all the way through this list. As you get better, you can try more difficult ones. You should also be playing and listening to, in my opinion, a variety of musical genres. This will give you a better, more diverse knowledge to draw from. But let's go and jump back into chords. So the first thing on chords I'd recommend is power chords. Open chords. I was going to say, if you're mostly into like metal and rock, you could start with power chords instead, and that would be perfectly fine. Otherwise, I put that a little bit lower down the list. But open chords is usually where I start people off at. Just working basic major, minors, like C, G, D, E for major, minor, and such. Now, you can also add in some 7s, some sus2, sus4s, and stuff like that. But just getting some of the most common shapes down, especially if some of the shapes are hard for you, like an F major, maybe go to the F major 7, which doesn't require the bar, or D minor 7, which is kind of simplified without that finger. So focus on majors and minors, but if there's one that's giving you trouble and there's a different chord that's easier, maybe do that first, and that's fine. So let me jump back into, I'll just kind of bounce back and forth between the single notes and the chords. So basic technique down on some fingers. Again, you're playing songs already. Work on alternate picking, basically just going down up. That if you just do downstrokes or just upstrokes, you're not going to develop the speed that you will from the alternate picking, so you want to develop that. Later points, down in the optional section, I've got economy picking, which if you don't know what that is, again, I got a video on that. And later on when I talk about arpeggios, I've got sweep picking. So there's many different ways to pick, but I'd start with alternate picking. That's the simplest. Now, the next thing on chords, after getting some basic open chords down, is start learning to read rhythms. And this is one of those things that there's many different levels of. You can start with basic quarter notes and eighth notes. And a good way to make sure you're in time, either count, tap your foot, or use a metronome that will click off a beat to it, and just start playing like quarter notes and eighth notes in different combinations. Then move on to adding ties, dotted notes, 16th notes, triplets, etc. And again, that's where you can get down the basics of one of these areas and still move on to the next one. You don't have to get down everything in reading rhythms. Once you've got some basic rhythms down, you can move on to the next section, which is power chords, and that's perfectly fine. Or you could work them at the same time even, and that's fine too. And especially as we go further on, the order becomes a little bit more arbitrary. At the beginning, I think the order is, you shouldn't jump around too much. You don't want to, right when you're starting off, jump right into playing intervals or major or minor scales necessarily. Okay, so the first scale I teach would be the minor pentatonic. So that's just your basic, scale like that you see in classic rock, blues. But even if you're a jazz player, or metal player, you can still see that in this, like jazz fusion and especially the classic metal stuff. But even some of the more modern stuff, you'll see it. So it's a good place to start off. It's not as complex as your minor and major fingerings. Okay, then I already said the next one after reading rhythms was power chords. That's a good one to get down, because if you get down like a 3-note power chord, either using the pinky or using a bar for those 3 notes, or just starting off with a 2-note version, and that's fine. All those would be different ways to play this. This is A note, an A power chord, or A5 if you're A and tab. It's a simplified form of a bar chord, basically. So if I add this finger and bar the first down, that becomes a major. If I leave this off with the bar, that's a minor. If I move down to this finger in power chord, add the bar and this finger is a minor, and a bar here would be a major. So both the 3-finger or the bar helps you play major and minor ones later. And that, I skipped ahead a little bit. That's on the list. Before I get to bar chords, so I would probably start working the notes on the neck. But it really wouldn't matter too much on the order on that. Notes on the neck, basically I'd start with, of course knowing the open ones so it's easier to tune, but then start with the 6th and 5th string. Once you get those down, you can get the rest of it down pretty easily through using octaves or counting or whatever way. But the 6th and 5th string will give you the names of most of your chords, scales, arpeggios, etc. Because the lowest note usually is the root or gives you the name of it. So if I'm playing the power chord here, that's a G5 because it's a G note. If I move it up, that's A5. So getting to know those 2 bass strings will help you with the names of the chords and such. So that's why I kind of jump into it fairly early on. Now, after jumping back to single notes, after doing the minor pentatonic, I would start, before moving on to any other scales, start improvising with that. At first, just doing something very simple, moving through it, and just feeling comfortable not getting lost in it. Then start learning some licks in it, and the next section right under that, as soon as you feel comfortable with it being memorized and can play through it a little bit, you can add vibrato, which is just shaking the note, bending, hammer-ons. That wasn't in pentatonic, but you get the idea. Pull-offs, slides. Any of those other techniques can be added into it to help you have more diversity when you're playing the pentatonic, whether it's improvising or learning other people's solos. Okay. The next section let's jump over to miscellaneous again. So these are things you can add in at any point, or you kind of will be working on as you do these other things. So I wrote work on timing. So on that, basically, if you work your strumming chords with a metronome or with a beat, or you work your scale in the same way, maybe counting 8th notes. Again, if you learn to read rhythms, you'll know what I mean when I say 8th notes or chord notes or any of that stuff. 8th notes is 2 per beat, so 1 and 2 and 3. And if you do that with a steady beat, whether it's a drum machine, metronome, whatever, you want to use it gives you an outside reference. That will help your timing. Other things that will help your timing would be playing along with a record if you know a song, playing along with a backing track, any of that type of stuff, playing with other people. And that's one of the best things you can do to develop your timing. I wrote that under miscellaneous too. Play with other musicians whenever possible. And as early as you can, that's a good thing to do. Now, if you don't know any beginner players when you're just starting off, and you can't find anyone else to practice with, that's fine. Practice on your own. But whenever you are able to play with someone, whether they're better than you, you're better than them, it doesn't matter. It will help you to do that. So I'd recommend as much as you can do that. Other things to work on along with these other things are work on efficiency. Efficiency, I mean, if you're playing with your fingers, use the finger that's closest to the section. If you're changing chords, don't move fingers if you don't need to. If you're playing scales or something like that, again, don't move your fingers unless you need to, and keep your motions small. Small picking actions, small fingering actions, so you're not doing a big motion. That will just slow you down. And that will help you to then develop speed also, which is another thing on the list in the miscellaneous section. I put these in miscellaneous because you can start doing these as soon as you get some basic things under your fingers on. If you're doing a pentatonic scale, you can try and be efficient. You can try and work on your timing. You can try and develop speed, all that stuff. Another thing I wrote on the miscellaneous section was harmony. I originally wrote that as ear training, but I switched it to harmony because ear training, I think, to a lot of your people implies just memorizing the sounds of different intervals, like a fifth and stuff. If you don't know what that means, that's later on the list. But I did a video on that too. You can check it out. But for harmony, you don't have to be so structured on it of actually setting aside time to work on just your ear and try and determine the sound of different things. Just when you play over like a chord, listen to, if you're playing single notes over it, how the notes relate to the chord and how they sound, and vice versa. Listen to how if someone's playing single notes over and you're doing the chord, listen to how the two harmonize with each other. Or you can play two lines of single notes together but not playing the same note, and kind of hear how they sound. You can even do it on your own by just listening to that and start training your ears. Obviously, there's many more things you can do for ear training. Try and figure out things by ear, lots of things like that. But let's go and keep this going. So the next one on the single note playing, I put extended pentatonic. So we're down to here now. That's basically a sliding pentatonic scale. That combined with your basic pentatonic, your minor pentatonic, are the two most common pentatonics you'll see, and you can do a lot of classic rock and a lot of blues just with those two scale fingerings. But it's still keeping things fairly simple. The pentatonic scales are 5-note scales, so you're still on your 5-note scales. Next thing on chords, I have, again, these don't have to be done at the same time. You could be further on one list than on the other one. Figure out the chords in the key, and I'm not going to get into that. I did a whole video on that, but knowing what chords are in all the keys will help you when you're strumming rhythms and trying to do something that someone else can play over, or that just to know that it will sound good together. So the next one on single note playing, major and minor scales. So we've done pentatonic scales up until this point. The major and minor scales are the 7-note scales instead. So the pentatonic fits inside those, and so anytime you're hearing a lot of the fast runs and stuff, that will be coming from your 7-note scales. So jazz, classical, modern metal, stuff like that, you'll see a lot of the 7-note scales. So start learning those and learn them across the whole neck. There's many different ways to finger them, but at first just get one position for each spot in the neck, and then you can try positions that go diagonally in different directions, or the shift on one string, and lots of options of that. Okay, for chords, then after you know the chords in key, your bar chords, open chords, start adding in all the other types of chords. Extended chords like 7s, 9s, 11s, 13s, altered chords like flat 5, flat 9, sharp 5, etc. Diminished chords, all the different possibles, sus, slash, etc. Also, jumping back to the notes, next thing after scales, I put intervals. At this point, it really doesn't matter which one you do next to this. All these are good to play. The next three are intervals, arpeggios, and sequences, but you can mix up the order. Intervals is basically coming through a major scale. So that'd be a 2, a major 3, a 4 in numbers, which can help you with understanding scales, chord formulas, arpeggios, ear training, all that stuff. So intervals are a good thing to know. Basically, when you see numbers attached to a chord, like a major 7, that's referring to an interval being added into that chord. So after intervals, I've got arpeggios and sweep picking. Sweep picking is just when you're going to take something and go in one direction. So a lot of times the arpeggio, which is just the notes of a chord played one at a time, will be swept because there's oftentimes just 1 or 2 notes on a string, and when you're doing 1 note on a string, it's faster to sweep across than to try and alternate pick across. So I put those here, arpeggios and sweep picking. So I learn those at the same time, take a very simple shape, and learn that till you do it cleanly with a sweep picking. After that, on the chord side, after doing the extended, you could do this first too. Doesn't matter which you do between learning all those other chords. But at some point you should learn chord formulas. Chord formulas will tell you basically the definition or formula for creating all those other chords, for major chords, 7th chord, 6th chord, whatever. You'll know which notes are in them, and that will help you to understand them and be able to play different fingerings on them. Next one, single notes, is sequences or patterns. That's a good thing for technique exercise, but can also be used in licks and stuff. So a sequence can be anything. It could be an interval, like thirds. It could be a pattern, like just playing 3 notes and then repeating it off each note. So it could be something more complex, but basically it's something that you can move through a scale and repeat. So that's sequences and patterns. So that was these 2 lists. Now I'll jump over to optional things and some more of the miscellaneous. So most of the miscellaneous we've already covered. The one that we haven't would be learn more theory. I wouldn't worry till we got at least halfway down the list to get into theory too much on here. But things like circle fifths, and there's a lot of practical theory that will benefit your playing. If it's something fairly abstract, leave it till you're fairly advanced to even worry about and then I'd say it's a little bit optional still. Some optional things I've listed here are economy picking, which is basically combining sweep picking and alternate picking. Tapping, which is the traditional like tapping a finger and doing that type of thing. Finger picking, basically hearing like classical music and stuff, where you're using different fingers and a thumb, which you could also do hybrid picking, which is basically using the pick and a finger combined. Reading standard notation. I don't think for beginners that's important. I don't even think it's a necessary thing for advanced players, but it can be a beneficial thing. I'm really glad that I learned to read standard music. This allows me to arrange music that wasn't written for guitar, violin music, piano music, etc. for guitar. So I can take like a Paganini Caprice or something, or Chopin piano piece, and I can arrange it for guitar. Also, a lot of the classical and jazz books are still written in standard music, so it helps you be able to read those. And so I think it is a beneficial thing. Plus, if you're speaking to other musicians, who aren't guitarists, they're not going to be able to read tab. So then you can still write stuff out for them, or at least understand what they write out. Okay, but again, not something that I think is absolutely necessary, but it can be beneficial. Also, like when I went to GAT, almost everything was written in standard music back in the 80s when I went there. So if I wouldn't have been able to read standard music, I would have been totally lost there. I wouldn't have been able to get through the classes. Other options, chord melody, which usually you'll see in jazz more, basically like it sounds. You're creating melodies through your chord changes, sometimes combining single notes, sometimes just combining notes in the bass or the high note in the chord progression to kind of create a continuing melody as you change through chords. Exotic scales, this could be from the fairly common ones like harmonic minor, melodic minor, whole tone, diminished, or any of the more esoteric ones from Asian ones and Middle Eastern ones, etc. So kind of exotic scales or unusual arpeggios. Since any chord can become an arpeggio, the most common ones are basically major or minor ones, and some things like sevens and stuff. But anything can be arpeggio. So there's a lot of ones that people don't necessarily play that much that you could jump into. Now for both single notes and playing chords, I'm down here, so we're almost through it. Just stick with it a little longer. And if you do like the video, please click like, comment, subscribe. I'm trying to build up my channel, and that helps me get more viewers. Okay, so where I wrote for both single note and chords, practice playing and changing between different keys is good. So practice, soloing and switching keys, or playing chord progressions and switching keys on it. Learn alternate fingerings for scales, arpeggios, and chords, including chords and arpeggio inversions too, which an inversion is when you're not starting on the root or the name of the chord. So if you have a C major, which is C, E, and G, if you start on the E or the G, those would be inversions. But you can do so many different fingerings for scales and chords and arpeggios. If I'm playing a basic A minor arpeggio, I could do that, but I could also move forward and play it. I could also move backward, and the same thing goes with scales and chords. In fact, I did a video where I showed a couple dozen different ways to play a major 7 chord. So yeah, there's so many options. Another thing I just wrote: keep learning, experimenting, and trying new things. Once you've made these categories, like some of the ones we were just talking about, like scales and arpeggios, there's so many different ways you can play them. I'm still discovering new ways and making videos on new ways when I do discover them, and even after teaching since 1987. Okay. Then take things you already know and try and improve them or understand them better. A lot of times people will kind of do something in a rote fashion where they maybe play one lick in one position. Take that lick, play it in different octaves, play it in different keys, refinger it into different ways so it's not always the same fingering. Change it, add notes to it, subtract notes to it, combine it with different things. So, don't get complacent. If you only know one way to play a chord, but you play a chord all the time, learn a half dozen different ways. Learn a dozen different ways to play a chord. Then you have more options. You're not stuck in one position on the neck. You can play it anywhere on the neck and with different sounding fingerings. So always push yourself to do something more. Don't get too easy on yourself. For a long time, I got stuck in those ruts too, where I would have, maybe 2 or 3 different ways to do something, so that was good enough. And I never really, and some of that stuff, until I started making these videos and started looking at it in more depth and saying, okay, I want to make a video on this, let's find a dozen ways to do this. I just, got lazy and didn't do that. I played the 3 or 4 ways that I knew and left it at that. So, keep pushing yourself all the time. And then last thing I wrote is, main thing, have fun. Playing guitar shouldn't be a chore. You can kind of see the list here. Again, it's on my Patreon page, so download it, keep it as a reference, print it out, and then check out some of my other videos to get more details on a lot of these areas. Okay, thanks for watching. I'll leave it at that.